Welcome to the Expansive CEO podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Chapman, founder of Expansive CEO and X Squared Wealth Planning. Buckle in as we explore how to create true prosperity and build a business and a life that expands beyond yourself and makes a dent in the universe. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Expansive CEO podcast. I am your host, Hannah Chapman, and this is another edition of Investment Friday. It is Thursday, November 14th at 4:14 p.m. as I am recording this, and it is just me today. Brad Haynes could not join us for this week, and we are going to talk more about the economy, what's been happening this week and last week, since the election. And we're going to talk more about tariffs. So why are we going to talk more about tariffs? If you have been listening, you maybe have heard a few Investment Friday episodes, I think 3 actually, where Brad and I have talked about tariffs, but we need to talk about it again. And I would love for this to be, again, like I said last week, actually something that you feel comfortable sharing with people who don't really understand how tariffs work, or don't really understand what the impact might be on the economy and what we might want to pay attention to going forward. So this is going to be a little bit more of a primer. And we're going to talk about, again, how it actually works, who pays them, what it means, all of that. And we're going to go over a few questions that I have seen around, happening in the zeitgeist, you might say, and then also questions that people have asked me directly. And yeah, just share more of that. So if you have any questions, if you have anything that's been coming up over the last couple of weeks since the election that you've heard about, that you want more information about, any economic policies, anything like that, I would love to receive them, and talk about them more on the podcast and see what happens. Or see what you have to ask about and then respond to that. So first of all, today the markets are down. Right now, the major indices are down. A lot of stocks are down for the day, but they have been up quite significantly over the last week and a half. That was, as we said last week on the podcast, due to the appearance of certainty. They all of the media outlets called the election for Trump pretty quickly. A lot of the states were called, when very few votes had been actually counted and had come in. So that was interesting to see this time around. And so we are actually, also, if you've been following, we're seeing some state races come in closer than was expected. So we might actually see some rumblings of recounts in different swing states. If that were to happen, we might see an uptick in volatility, especially over the end of November and through December. If there turns out to be uncertainty where we thought there was certainty, the market does not like that. The market never wants to see uncertainty. So we will watch that. We will watch that closely. For right now, at this very moment, we haven't been making big shifts, as far as, making any sweeping changes to anything, because policy has not changed yet, right? No matter what, even if we don't get a recount, even if nothing shifts, and Trump takes office in the White House in January, we still have, from now until then, it's about 67 days, I think, until Inauguration Day. So with that in mind, we have this period of waiting. So we're not making any changes right this second, as a firm, changing people's portfolios or anything like that. But we know, And we have heard across the economy that there are a lot of businesses that are starting to preemptively make some changes with the expectation that tariffs will be sweeping across the board. And we're going to say at least 10%, that we're going to see a 10% tariff on all imported goods from everywhere. And to remind people what happened during the last Trump presidency, that also included a lot of tariffs on Canadian goods. And that is the one thing, that's the example we're going to talk about today, because the one that really flows um, into a lot of people's lives right now, and what we talk about a lot with the housing need and the housing crisis, basically, that's happening in the United States right now, is that we don't have enough houses. We don't have enough houses built for everyone who wants or needs a house. We don't have enough smaller homes built, houses in more affordable price ranges for more Americans. Um, we don't have those, and they're not being built, actually, right? A lot of things that are being built right now are multifamily, whether those are apartments or townhomes. Um, but even a lot of those, those are rental units. Apartments are rental units. They're not condos, they're apartments. Even the townhomes, I'm thinking of a specific example in Arizona near my in-laws' house. They built, not my in-laws, but a builder company built this, little development of townhomes, little 2-bedroom homes, and they're all for rent. They're not for sale. So that is a very interesting example of, they're building the big homes that, maybe start at 400 or $500,000, and big developments of those types of homes. Or on the, side of, okay, we can't afford, if people can't afford a 400 or $500,000 house, or more, then the homes that are being built, or the places to live that are being built, are all rental type places. So that's an interesting piece as well. So we have, the housing issue in the United States, which, when we talk about interest rates, why is it an issue? Part of it is the interest rates, right? So interest rates have been very high for the last couple of years, especially mortgage interest rates. And as the Federal Reserve, has started cutting rates recently, we expected or hoped to see mortgage interest rates coming down along with that. So what happened last week? Last week, the Fed cut again another 0.25%, so 0.25% or 25 basis points. So they cut the rate again. But what did mortgage rates do? At that same time, average mortgage rates went up by about 0.25%. They had been sitting around 6.5%, and averages went up to around 6.75% across the nation. Well, that's opposite. Why? Why is that happening, right? Well, because mortgage rates are actually tied to the bond market and treasury yields, which we did talk about a little bit last week, right? And treasury yields went up because we are expecting, with the tariffs, that there will be higher inflation next year. So the bond market responded badly, you would say, is a good or a light explanation. It did not respond well to the prospect of tariffs, and the mortgage rates that are tied to those treasury rates and to the bond market, um, they went up. They did not go down. So now, what else is affected by that? Credit card rates, short-term loan rates, personal loan rates, all of that, right? So we're really not seeing relief in that area yet. And how is this going to be affected even more? So, by the way, I don't mean for this to be a super doom and gloom episode. That is not my intention here, but it is my intention to educate and to help people understand the um, the mechanics of the economics that are happening right now, like why things are doing what they're doing. That's my intention here. So we're taking this as information, as education, so that we can make informed decisions and choices. Um, yeah. So let's go. Let's keep going. So we've got mortgage rates that are higher rather than lower, even though we've lowered interest rates. And we've got this prospect of tariffs. And this, as we have talked about, is an inflationary measure. Why is that inflationary? Well, I am going to show rather than just tell. So we're going to do a little bit of screen mirroring. If you are watching on YouTube, you can see on my screen a very crude drawing of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It is freehand. I did not copy this from anything. So yeah, there it is. If you're not watching on YouTube, I will explain everything that I am drawing. But if you want to see my very badly drawn United States, Canada, and Mexico, go ahead and check it out on YouTube as well. So when we are talking about tariffs, we're going to go with an example that we've given before, and I'm going to detail it out even further. Last time we had tariffs in the last Trump presidency, one of the things that was affected was lumber. So Canada is where we get most of our lumber in the United States. We got all these nice, beautiful trees up here in Canada, right? And then they chop them down and we get all this lumber that comes in on trucks. And there we go. We've got our big truck bringing our lumber in from Canada to the United States. And in the United States, we've got American Home Builders, called AHB. They are wanting to build some big developments, right? We need housing. We really need it. This is something that we have needed for a long time. We haven't had enough homes built since the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And we need it. We need homes. So they're planning on building developments in, we'll say, in the Dallas Fort Worth area, because why not? There's tons of homes being built there. They are going to need to buy their lumber in order to build the homes here in Texas, right? So we're going to build right there. We've got to get this lumber down here. American Home Builders is going to pay, let's say they're buying $100 million worth. There we go. $100 million worth of lumber. That's a lot of lumber. It's probably too much, but we're just going to go with it. From Canada over the course of the next year. I realize that's a big number. Just go with me. But they're gonna pay this money to the trucking company and to the lumber company, lumber mill, right? They're gonna pay everything they need to pay to get that lumber. But what does that mean? That means they're gonna have to pay $100 million to the lumber company, and then they're going to have to pay the tariff over here to Washington, D.C. The tariff gets paid by American Home Builders. And if it's a 10% tariff, that means they are paying, there we go, $10 million over here. This tariff is $10 million to the federal government. The Canadian company does not pay the tariff. The Canadian company just gets paid by American Home Builders. They get their money. They bring the lumber down. American Home Builders turns and has to then pay. This is a tax. A tariff is a tax. American Home Builders pays the tariff to the government. So instead of the base price, just the lumber being $100 million for all of these homes that are about to be built. Now it's $110 million of cost, just base starting out, right? Because we had to cover that 10% tariff as well. So what does that do? What does that do to the price of homes? It has to raise the price of homes. There's no other way around it. Home builders in particular don't tend to have huge margins, and they're taking on risk. We've talked about this a little bit too. And I'm going to stop sharing at this point. So we can go back to just my face here. Here I am. Home builders have had to take on a lot of risk since the financial crisis because the way that lending has happened, the banking restrictions, and all that, home builders have a lot harder time getting funding for their projects than they used to. And so this is, at this point, it's been 14 years of that. Um, but it used to be easier. It used to be easier for them to get funding. And so now we've got this issue of, hey, it's more difficult for them to get funding in the first place. And now, so they're already paying higher interest rates when if they have to take out loans in order to build a large subdivision of homes or even a small subdivision of homes. If they have to take out loans for that from, private loans, private equity firms, wherever they're getting funding from, they're paying higher interest rates on that money. So that increases the costs of homes on the one side. Now, if we are slapping tariffs on, what was already, prices have gone up. Inflation has really increased the price of everything that goes into building a home over the last several years. And so the tariff is literally going to just be another increase on top of what we've already experienced with inflation. And so because home builders already have higher costs with the cost to borrow to even build the project, and then the risk inherent in building a subdivision, and maybe not selling it out, maybe having a hard time, filling it, they have to sell most of the homes, most of the lots, most of the homes in that subdivision in order to even break even. So there's a decent amount of risk involved in this industry. And so when we're talking about, hey, we need more homes in the United States, we need more affordable homes in the United States, the tariffs literally impact that very directly by making homes less affordable than they were before. The way Brad mentioned this last week too, the Peterson Institute did a kind of a wide range estimate about what a 10% tariff would do across the economy, and their conservative estimate is that it would add an additional 0.8% to the expected inflation rate for the next year already. So almost another percent of inflation just from tariffs. Nothing else. Not the regular inflation that we experience through normal years. We're going to add on another percent. So I just wanted that to be extra super clear. So, put that example anywhere. If we're talking about auto parts from Mexico, we get a lot of our auto parts from Mexico. Anything coming up from Mexico, same. We're paying for those goods, the car companies in the US that are assembling, we've got Toyota plants, for example, in Kentucky. We have a lot of car manufacturing plants in the United States, but the parts aren't necessarily all sourced from the United States. The parts are sourced from Mexico, from China, from different places around the world. And so when Toyota, for example, has to buy parts from Mexico in order to do the final assembly of their vehicles in Kentucky, they have to pay Mexico, pay for the price of the goods for those parts. That part goes to the Mexican company. Um, and then the 10% tariff, Toyota in America has to turn around and pay that tariff to the government. It doesn't matter across the board, right? So we've got goods coming in from China, goods coming in from Europe, goods coming from everywhere. We import goods from a lot of places. The other example I wanted to give last time was, let's use a smaller business example. Let's say um, your local screen printing shop and you buy your t-shirts from China because many, many, many of the world's textile factories are in China. It's a big manufacturing operation to create fabric. It takes a lot of resources. Those factories are expensive to build and expensive to maintain and to run. So there's a lot of that infrastructure that already exists in China. So if you're a local screen printer and you um, source your shirts from China, and let's say you're putting in a $10,000 order for shirts that's supposed to last you for the next 3 to 4 months. Well, you're now going to be paying $11,000 for those shirts just for the raw material. Right. And so when it comes to you get to, as a small business owner, you have to then decide, okay, do I have enough of a profit margin to eat that cost, that extra $1,000 of costs of goods sold? Is that possible? Or is that really going to like slim your margin? Maybe you had a healthy profit margin. And I'm going to hope you do, as someone who coaches small business owners, right? Um, I hope you have a profit margin built in there. I hope you're able to pay yourself. And by profit margin, I mean net income so that you can pay yourself a wage. Because for most small business owners, the total revenue minus the cost of goods sold, if you're a small business owner, that's usually your pay. So you want to make sure your costs of goods sold and your operating expenses are less than half of your total revenue is the goal. That's the goal that I help my clients work towards. Right. I want to see you able to pay yourself about 50% of your revenue. In most cases. I'm not saying that's the exact right number for every business. It's not always. But if you're able to pay yourself between 30 and 50%, you're doing pretty good and better than a lot of other small business owners are doing actually. So when we think about that, like the average small business owner might only be paying themselves 10 or 20% of their revenue. And then if a tariff, if they have a physical product that they need to source, and then 10% gets added to their operating expenses, their costs of goods sold, um, that's a big issue. And so they have to decide if they're going to absorb that and keep their prices the same, if their customers will pay an additional 10% for that product. They really have to figure that out if it's going to work or not. But even for that small print shop, the small screen printing shop, they're going to pay the factory in China $10,000, and then they're going to have to turn around and pay $1,000 to the government. So, what is actually happening here? Why was this even floated as an idea? Because every economist that has talked about this has said the same thing, that tariffs are inflationary, that it's not good for the economy, and that the retaliatory tariffs, so if Europe puts big tariffs on American goods and Canada and Mexico put tariffs on American goods, um, that makes American exports go down too, right? So like it hits on both sides. So why? Why is this even being floated as an idea? Well, one piece of it is what we've talked about with the tax cuts. If we are going to cut taxes as aggressively as Trump is um, proposing that we cut taxes, then we are going to have huge deficits, humongous deficits, biggest deficits we've ever seen. Yes, I did that on purpose. And what's going to happen is that unless we actually do cut spending very significantly, which comes with a host of other issues, uh, we don't have other revenue being created. Taxes are the revenue that run the government. So tariffs, when Trump has been running on tariffs this whole time, tariffs are the thing. Tariffs are the revenue stream. It's a revenue stream for the government. So he's saying that he's cutting taxes for, especially for corporations. That's actually the biggest tax cut. The biggest tax cut is for corporations, going from 21% down to 15%, and then on high wage earners, right? So very high income. Um, Everyone else actually pays more in taxes under his tax plan. So in order to facilitate those corporate tax cuts and those tax cuts for the very wealthy, we have to have a revenue source. Otherwise, the government can't balance its budget. So that revenue source is tariffs. I feel like I feel like it was a hoodwink for a lot of Americans. And I say that because after the election, literally the day after and for a couple of days after, there was a spike in Google searches for the phrase "what is a tariff?" After Trump was elected, after people really started hearing, what does this mean? Why are people saying tariffs are going to be bad? An absolute like skyrocketing spike for people wanting to understand what is a tariff? What does this mean? And that's why I say it feels like the American public allowed, I don't want to say allowed themselves to be, but they were hoodwinked. Trump campaigned on tariffs being, a way to bring manufacturing back to America, a way to strengthen the American economy, and didn't ever really explain what that meant or how they worked. And it doesn't it it's really unfortunate is what it is. It's really unfortunate that people didn't listen or search or ask or push back more before the election, because this is a big deal. It's not a small deal. This is a big deal, right? That inflation, which has been um, a rough thing for a lot of families, a lot of middle income and lower income families to deal with over the last 4 years since COVID, it's going to be exacerbated. It's going to get worse. And it's because of, it's not in spite of, inflation has been coming down. Inflation has been, in the United States, inflation has come down more than any other country over the last several years. We have recovered the best from the COVID lockdowns than any other developed country. That's statistical. That's numbers and data. Um, and yet we're we're talking about, oh, we need to boost the economy. We need it to get better. It's, in some ways, yes, it is not working for all Americans. I talk about that frequently. Whenever we talk about how great the economy is doing, I always come back to, hey, I understand and realize and recognize that it is not working for everybody. This is one of the ways. These tariffs are regressionary in insofar as they hit middle and lower classes the hardest. The people who are already living paycheck to paycheck are going to see prices rise. And that is the hard part. They're not really or not at all going to see their taxes reduced in their paycheck. Or, they're not going to get a bigger refund at the end of the year, but they're going to see groceries get more expensive. All of the fruit that we import, when we import grapes, we import bananas, we billions of dollars of produce gets imported from South America, from Mexico, um, from all over the globe. All of that will be subject to tariffs. So your bananas will be more expensive. Not just not just your vehicles or your houses or your screen printed t-shirts. Your produce will be more expensive as well because we don't grow. I mean, that one's a pretty easy one. We don't grow everything here in America. We grow a lot of things, but we don't have the climate to grow everything that we consume here. And so we are, we have been a very globalized country for a long time because we've had trade agreements. We've created trade agreements and we've created um, relationships with other countries so that we can have beneficial relationships with one another. And tariffs aren't it. Tariffs are not it. It really it frustrates me to know how many people are going to be negatively impacted by this policy. And my only hope, truly my only hope in talking about it and talking about it as much as we have so far and in explaining it and really like trying to make um make more educational content about it is so that if we make enough noise, if people understand enough, if we push back enough, maybe this actually won't happen. Maybe that proposal will go by the wayside. That's what my hope is. That's why I feel like I need to say something and I need to speak up. I know, I know how this works. I know it's not good for all of the people who are living paycheck to paycheck, or even close to that, right? There are Americans who were doing great in 2019 and 2020, who had extra money. And because of inflation over the last several years, because of the stacking, basically, right? We had really high inflation for a couple of years, and as inflation has come down, prices have not decreased. So those families that were doing great, could take vacations, had extra income back in 2018, 2019, that same amount of income is now no longer quite enough for a lot of people. And this type of stuff, these types of policies, uh, hurt average Americans. The other aspect that I wanted to talk about, in addition to, or in conjunction with tariffs. So we talked about mortgages. We talked about mortgage rates and home prices, right? So we're not seeing those go down next year, most likely. Mortgage rates are going to stay higher. Home prices are going to likely climb higher. Vehicle prices are going to be higher. Um, Produce, groceries, it's going to be more expensive next year. And if we look at healthcare, right, one of the other big pieces that they're talking about is eliminating Obamacare, which one of the other Google searches that came out of the woodworks this last week was, you know, is Obamacare the ACA? A lot of people did not realize that the Affordable Care Act was the actual name for what was dubbed Obamacare. And they assumed that Obamacare was bad and the ACA was good because that's what the healthcare that they have for their family. That's what allows them to have healthcare. For small business owners, for a lot of small business owners, the ACA is what allows them to have healthcare that is at least somewhat affordable compared to what it was before Obamacare existed. And so when people realized that Obamacare is the ACA and they're talking about repealing the ACA, people were really upset. And it's again, it's sad. It's sad to think that people didn't know that that was what they were voting for. Um, but that's we have to educate. We have to educate. And it might be a little too late at this point. Um, but hopefully not. Hopefully not. If enough people come back and say, hey, we no, please, like, absolutely do not. And talk to their congresspeople and talk to their senators, and let them know that no, that we actually do not want this. Maybe, maybe there's a chance that we don't get a full repeal of the Affordable Care Act because they do not have anything to replace it with. And that would also be devastating for a lot of people who rely on that for their health insurance. Um, the last thing that I will say today, so some of the questions that I have gotten recently, a question from friends actually was, well, we were planning on redoing our kitchen next year. Should we buy our appliances now? And I said, yes, absolutely. If you have the money available, which they do, they have money saved. They're planning to redo the kitchen next summer. Well, if the tariffs go into place in January, all of those appliances are automatically 10% more, at least. At least. There's no saying that they won't hike prices higher because people are expecting it, which is maybe a little bit cynical to say, but um, just know that that's a possibility. So, yes, if you have money available, if you were planning on redoing anything, if you were planning on, you know, renovations, anything like that, consider it. If there are any good Black Friday deals, which sometimes there are, sometimes they're not real anymore. Um, but if there is something that you see is actually a good Black Friday deal, that is something, especially on appliances or, bigger purchase, I would heavily consider that if you have the funds available to do that now rather than wait until next year. Um, if possible. If that's going to be a stretch for your budget, or, if like me, like my family, we're moving next year. That's We're moving next year, next summer, and we're just going to have to deal with it. I can't buy a house right now. Um, so, for some of us, we just have to bite the bullet, and that's how it's going to be. But if you have the opportunity and you have the funds, that's absolutely something that I would consider. Yes, buy your big purchases now. Um, and that goes for um, if there is a good financing offer as well, right? I have no idea if any of them are, but sometimes Home Depot or Lowe's or different places, they'll do 0% financing. Um, if you make a bigger purchase, buy a washer, dryer, or refrigerator or whatever, um, you know, you might get that 0% financing offer. Also, great. Yeah, utilize that. I think that's a fabulous tool to use when savings rates are pretty high right now, right? So if you have, let's say you have $10,000 set aside, you were going to buy some appliances, they have a 0% offer, do it. You have the money set aside, keep it in the savings account and pay monthly. Pay on that balance monthly while your, $10,000 continues to earn 4.5%. Um, if that's what it's earning right now, which, some savings accounts are still at that higher rate. So that would be my recommendation for anyone thinking about, those bigger purchases right now. And in general, yeah, if there's a purchase, and this is what businesses are doing right now as well. That's what I wanted to say before. There are a lot of businesses that are doing this exact same math, and looking at the costs of goods right now, looking at the contracts that they have lined up for next year, looking at what they might need to purchase, and they're starting to make these decisions as well, um, to pre-purchase what they need in order to, hopefully save money on the products that they use to do business next year and 2026, and for however long potential tariffs last. So that is my my deep primer, I guess, on tariffs. I hope that it is helpful. I hope that it is something that if you hear from other people, like, well, I thought they worked this way, or I don't know how they really work. And you can say, hey, here, listen to this. She goes over it, and there's a terrible map of the United States that, she does an illustration. And if there's anything else that you have questions about, I am more than happy, again, to receive your questions, to receive, um, what you're wondering about, curious about, concerned about. Send it. Send it to me, Hannah, HANNAH, at expansiveceo.com. And I will address it on either a fireside chat episode or an Investment Friday episode if it's a economics related question. And until next time, I hope you are happy and healthy, and we are all going to we're gonna make it. We're gonna get through the next 4 years together, one way or another, right? So let's try to make the best of it that we can, make the most informed decisions that we can, and continue to educate ourselves and educate the people around us that are open to that help. So thanks for listening, and we will see you next week. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like and subscribe. And again, if anything resonated with you from this episode, I would love to hear from you. Email me at Hannah, HANNAH, at expansiveceo.com, and tell me about it. And if you're ready for your greatest expansion, you can find ways to work with me at expansiveceo.com and at x2wealthplanning.com. That's X, the numeral 2, wealthplanning.com. So until next time, remember that there is enough, you are enough, and your birthright in this lifetime is to be expansive.